What?
I'd like to thank my colleagues for joining me today for this discussion about the House Republican Task Force on Jobs and the Economies and our recommendations to fix our supply chains. Our supply chains are currently broken. When my constituents order goods, whether it's furniture for their home or appliances, wait times are atrocious. Everyday staples are still missing from store shelves in Western North Carolina and across the country. For more than a year, the Biden administration and Americans generally have seen this issue, and it's now become a top priority. However, like many of my constituents, they're asking, where are the solutions? As with the multitude of problems in the Biden economy, we hear a lot of talk from Democrats about solutions, but we see very little action. Now, there's nowhere that is more evident of this problem than Biden's baby formula crisis. It's unconscionable for parents in America today in the 21st century to be unable to find their preferred formula to feed their children. As a parent of young children, I've experienced the stress and pain of this crisis and what it's causing to other families across America, and I've experienced it firsthand. To those parents, I say, your pain and fears are real. Republicans hear you, and no amount of Democrats' spend can alleviate what you're feeling. Instead of addressing the root cause of this crisis, the Biden administration has pursued half measures that only address the symptoms. The good news for struggling Americans is House Republicans have real solutions to secure U.S. supply chains. That is exactly what we're here to discuss today. As a part of our work on the Task Force on Jobs and the Economy, we've zeroed in on 5 key themes to get our supply chains functioning again and deliver results for the American people. First, building healthy communities by securing our supply chains. Second, reining in activist regulators. Third, prioritizing domestic energy and critical mineral development. And finally, decreasing red tape and getting goods moving again. All those things will ensure the availability of critical products necessary in our marketplace. Today, I'm joined by task force members who have led on these issues. Congressman Adrian Smith, Congressman French Hill, and Congresswoman Lisa McClain. And that will be where our discussion goes today. So why don't we begin with you? Adrian Smith, thank you for being here today. I know we have important things we can discuss about making our communities healthy by securing our supply chains. We'd like to hear from you.
Well, thank you. This is such a key time in our economy. The supply chain crisis that meets inflation around every corner just makes it worse. The policies out of the one-party rule ruling the government right now from the Democrats, it's not working. They want to double down, and so that's why I'm glad we can focus on the solutions. When you look at, for healthy communities, the cost of housing, I think the National Realtors Association just reported that the median price is up 13.6% just from the month of June. And this is tangible to families all across America. You touched on the formula issue. I think that is very tangible, not just to my own household, my family, but millions of folks across America. When you look at the solutions we need to pursue, though, we have some non-controversial trade policies that lapsed in terms of some tariff relief last year. The first thing we should do is renew that relief. And this is directly impacting supply chains, building products, building materials that contribute to housing, and so that should be considered lower, the lowest hanging fruit. And yet there's been resistance by the politics in the Democratic caucus. I can't speak to all those details, obviously, because I'm not in that room. But as we together focus on the Ways and Means Committee, for example, about trade policies and supply chains, this tariff relief is key for these materials, especially, like I said, lumber and numerous other materials. I saw a report where backpacks for kids heading back to school, up 19%. And this is avoidable. That's what we should really focus on, is the fact that these are avoidable scenarios, and I think working together to focus on these solutions is the best way to go.
So you mentioned tariff policy. So this is trade policy and making sure that we have trusted trading partners that we're buying goods from, making sure we have those linkages around there, and then the cost of bad trade policy on goods in our marketplace and the availability of our goods. But also regulation. Talk a little bit more about the regulation and the regulatory challenges that impact the cost of things.
Well, when you look at the cost and availability, I mean, there are scenarios, and not just formula either, but someone may be prepared to pay more for something, but it's not on the shelf. It's not even online right now, and so these very tangible shortages are a problem. I think looking at the regulations, when those regulations were put in place, they did not game out necessarily what could happen if a particular plant would shut down, or if something tragic happened, or even let's say a fire in a major plant. We need to really look at regulations across the board and cut through those to where we can make sure that we've got redundant supplies so that consumers are not harmed.
Well, I think this goes right into the work that you've been about, French Hill, about reining in activist regulators and what that means to the consumer. And so why don't we get into the details of how we rein in the current Biden administration's regulatory pursuits.
Well, thanks, Patrick. And Adrian makes such a good point, because Nancy Pelosi tells us that if we spend more money, we bring down inflation, we improve the supply chain. Joe Biden told people in the State of the Union that we just had to get our costs under control, and that would improve the supply chain and lower inflation. And both these things just demonstrate why his approval rating is in the 30s, because Americans are saying these guys don't have their act together. They're not competent. They're doing a terrible job getting the economy working for the American people. And a key area is regulation. Joe Biden appoints all the regulators. It's his policy that's being implemented. And one area that we've seen over and over again that's inhibiting the supply chain that we're talking about today is something called Environmental Social Governance Regulation, ESG. And for Joe Biden, this is about climate change and making sure that we shut down fossil fuels as a source of power for our homes, power for our industries, and of course oil goes into everything that we make. And you say, well, how does that work? Well, Joe Biden said he was going to end the fossil fuel business. He's proposed $145 billion in new taxes on it. And over in the regulatory side, he's intimating, well, the bank regulators won't let us offer loans to drill an oil well, build a pipeline. Or investment banks can't make a market in the stock on those companies. Or anything that revolves around climate, forcing public companies to release all how they are fighting climate change in their public documents. So this is being done at the energy regulators, but also at the Securities and Exchange Commission, which we work on and oversee as a part of House Financial Services Committee. So House Republicans are pushing back on that, saying, look, we're not climate deniers, but we want to unleash American energy, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. We want to have capital formation grow faster so that more people have more public companies to invest in their 401k plan, that our energy producers and others can get the capital needed to grow their business. And you don't do that by raising regulatory costs that inhibits someone going public, someone raising capital for a startup business. And ESG, in the name of climate, is inhibiting economic growth, raising costs, and making it harder to employ people and start new businesses.
Well, translate that into what the consumers will see. Because we have, on the climate regulations, you have phase 1, 2, and 3, scope 1, 2, and 3. And when they have the full implementation of these requirements, let's convey this to what our constituents will hear, the average American will see as a result of that.
Our households, our families are going to see less reliable power, like you saw in Texas in a winter, 2 winters ago, or you see in California now. You're going to have less reliable power. You're going to have more expensive power. It's going to cost more to fill your car up, more to heat your home, all because of ESG regulatory costs that are diminishing the supply of energy. If you're a saver or an investor, you will see a less investments to be considered. and that can hurt your long-term retirement. And then finally, some of the ESG aspects have so much cost associated with them, we think that it will actually reduce returns on your pension fund. If you're in a labor union pension fund or you have a 401k plan, you might have a lower return due to these Securities and Exchange Commission mandates.
So it's not just about energy policy. It drives up the cost of business for the average small business that does business in some way with a public company. Right? Isn't that how the regulations
Absolutely.
translate?
And people just are naive about the importance of the energy business. We don't have fertilizer for our food without natural gas. We don't have plastic cups and plates for a picnic for Labor Day weekend without oil to make the plastic. And so the transportation, which we're going to talk about today, is more expensive because of higher energy prices. And this is, I want to say, is a premeditated, planned action on the part of the Biden administration. This is not accidental. This was something Joe Biden campaigned on.
So, so you're talking about one piece of regulation that translates into a broader cost across the economy, not just for energy production, but for consumers of energy, not just for consumers of energy, but folks that think that their product has nothing to do with energy policy. Right. Which is a major issue, and our solution as House Republicans is to undo the bad, expensive regulations that are going to drive up the cost for the average Americans.
Right, and we can do that with the powers that we have in oversight. And one hope that we have as House Republicans is when we take the House back this fall, we can use something called the Congressional Review Act if we also have the Senate, which allows us to repeal these regulations that are so costly to our families. And through the power of oversight in each of our committees, we can call attention to these, as I say, failed management practices of the Biden administration or premeditated bad ideas that are costing our economy, our families, too much money.
So that's a very important segue into the next conversation that we need to highlight in our solutions that Lisa McClain, you've been an outspoken great leader on, and that's how we prioritize domestic energy production and ensuring that we have critical minerals available to us here at home. So let's talk about those solutions.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's economics, and it's economics 101. There's this thing called supply and demand that this administration is gravely out of touch with. We have a demand and a need for energy. Now, do we want clean energy? Do we want to protect the earth? Of course we do. But we have to do a transition, and it has to be an and, not an or. Prior to this administration, we were energy independent. We were a net exporter of energy. Now, the first thing that we have when the president takes office, he shuts down the Keystone Pipeline. Tell me how that helps America. I can't find one way that it does. Let me share with you how it hurts America. The demand for energy is still there. We still have the same demand. The difference is when this administration shut down our energy policies, our oil and gas leases, and prohibited drilling on our lands, what did that force us to do? Because remember, the demand was still there. That forced us to, one, release some of our energy reserves, right? Which I think we've released almost half of our energy reserves. And last I checked, I think we sold some of those barrels of oil to China. Again, I'm still struggling how to connect those dots. But, and what do? We are now having to ask our adversaries, beg our adversaries for gas and for oil and for minerals and for energy. But think about that. We are not supporting the American economy. This isn't supporting American jobs. This policy and these policies are supporting our adversaries' jobs and our adversaries' economy. And the most critical thing for any country is to have good economic policy. Because if you have a good economic policy, it leads to a good economy. It leads to better schools, more people paying taxes, which give you your social programs, right? Your economic system is what gives you your social programs. It's healthy, less crime. But we are dependent on others now for our energy when we can drill, and we can drill safer, I might add, than any other nation. So I would ask the Green New Deal people, where do you think it's better, safer, cleaner to drill oil and natural and minerals? In the United States, where unfortunately we do have regulation, or perhaps Venezuela, maybe Iran?
Right. So cleaner for the global for clean air globally, if we have domestic energy production, and moreover, if we have the right infrastructure, we can more readily, a more cost-effective, less carbon-intensive way, move those products, both raw and refined products, to market. Which means, like you began with, Keystone Pipeline, but pipelines generally being a more efficient, less environmentally impactful way to move products to market.
Yes.
What we see right now is the New England states have the highest cost of fuel in the marketplace today in the United States because they lack a pipeline to the Northeast. So refined products have to be either put on a boat, taken in via vessel, or trucked in. So this drives up the cost of moving products, people, commuting, and the impact of that is real. The ripple effects of energy policy across the economy is a major one. But we see in critical minerals that we have, as it relates back to trade policy, we need to have good trading relationships with those friends and allies that have the critical minerals we need to power our economy. And so we're seeing a lot of concerns about that.
Right. I mean, we're talking about what they call nearshoring or friendshoring, engaging with countries, our friends, and developing these more efficient delivery systems. I think about pipelines and energy. I mean, a pipeline is the most efficient way, green, if you will. It requires less energy to transport it, and we should see friendlier policies to deliver these sources of energy.
Right. And so about getting goods moving. French, you've worked significantly on policy in this realm. How do we ensure the movement of critical goods, services to where they're needed across the economy?
Yeah, the current economy is so troubling to business owners and operators because they are fighting inflation. They haven't seen it. Many people who aren't over 60 years old don't know what these 40-year high inflation rates look like on labor, cost of supply, inventory costs, and getting things to market. They're coping with that. They're coping with a lack of employees, and then they're accompanied by these high fuel costs. So here, getting goods to market, 70% of that is through trucks and trucking across our great country. And we have a shortage of truck drivers. And we have House Republicans that have offered good ideas, solid ideas. They're like, if you're 18 but not 21, you can get licensed to do interstate trucking and take some of the relief off these 60,000 job shortages we have in trucking that's clogging our ports, that's affecting our rail yards. So that's part of unleashing the supply, would be able to get more people licensed to truck. Why don't we have our people coming out of service who have been driving a truck for the service, why don't they get instant credibility and certification to be a truck driver in our country? We have a lot of members working on this, and I think that's a key element. But the vaccine mandate hurt that. Honestly, a lot of truck drivers, they're alone in their truck, but the federal government said, we want you to have a mandate that you have to be vaccinated. I've been vaccinated. I support the vaccine. But the point is that was a marginal barrier to get more people back to work to unclog the supply chain. So I think trucking is super important.
Everybody wants some big home run on infrastructure. And there's been the big debate here in Washington about this. But what you're talking about is this individual pieces of regulation or red tape that are pulling people out of the ability to get a job,
right?
Limiting the supply of people in that market, which either means we have a longer time to get our goods to market, we have more trucks that are sidelined and not enough operators to drive them. But that's just one segment, trucking, of that regulatory challenge and burden. But you're looking at it in a very holistic way, right? Piece by piece, regulation by regulation, that either drives up the cost of delivering things or takes people out of the marketplace?
Well, and as I say, I think Lisa's been in business before she was in Congress. I mean, finding labor now plagues every aspect of our economy in spite of high inflation. We have 12 million job openings, even as we might slip into recession right here. And so anything that keeps people out of the workforce, either educationally or being paid not to work, or some of the overly stimulative practices from the CARES Act and Joe Biden's rescue plan that keep people out of the workforce, that only exacerbates this problem.
So along those lines, it goes back to the question of critical minerals and relationships to that. Adrian, you're working on one of the key planks here is ensuring the availability of critical products in our market. How do you think about that? And what are the products that we're offering in terms of solutions?
Well, all these inputs to newer technologies, whether it's batteries, whether it's innovative approaches to energy production, there are materials that are needed that only exist in some other places. We ought not have have tariffs on those. I referenced earlier the miscellaneous tariffs bill that would offer relief ultimately to consumers, but to small businesses along the way, those who are needing these products, these materials to finish their goods so that they can get those to the marketplace. And the list is long in terms of what these, whether it's minerals, whether it's other materials that are needed for manufacturing especially. And we're talking domestic manufacturing, that's opportunity here at home.
So those critical minerals are around the globe, many in less developed countries that have trading relationships that are well established globally.
Right.
How do we access that? How do we think about that smartly so we can get those minerals where they are, where they reside in our earth, and bring them to our market where they're needed for high-tech manufacturing?
Well, it's important that we remove the barriers to bringing them in from other countries, but it's also important to make sure we've got policies in place for domestic production or exploration. I know that there are some opportunities across our country that some of these critical minerals do exist. It takes some investment. It takes some innovation to extract those. And so I think we need to make sure that we remove the barriers there and the unnecessary regulations that exist.
Lisa, you have things to add?
You make a very valid point in what you say is we need to make some investments and you need to incentivize. And I think the whole problem with this administration starts with you can't fix a problem that you don't think exists. And that's what we're fighting. I mean, you listen to the president who says that inflation is transitory. I mean, I've never met an administration or a president that is so out of touch with reality. I know the people in my district, they're suffering. They're wondering, do I buy medicine or do I put gas in my car? We have a problem. We have to admit that we have a problem. How do we get out of the problem? Let's remember, government's the one and bad policy is the ones that who have gotten us into this problem. We don't need more government. Government needs to get out of the way. We need to put the power back into the business hands. Because at the end of the day, where does innovation come from? I can't think of the last thing the government innovated. But where does it come from? It comes from business. So Adrian, if we can incentivize businesses for progress, that's where the progress is going to come from. That's where the innovation is going to come from. We don't need to clamp them down and burden them with more regulation. We need to open it up and let them invest. But it goes back to the oil and gas, right? As a business owner, if you tell me, hey, I'm probably going to shut this down in 5 years, but I need it now. I need this oil and gas. I really need it now. I know a ton of your investment is going to come in up front, and I'm going to shut it down when you just start to be profitable. Really, no one really wants to take up that bargain? Of course they don't. It's logical. It's common sense. The American people are logical, right? And we have to go back to belief in the American people, and we have to stop being dependent, right? I tell my kids, don't be dependent on me. Please don't be dependent on your spouse. And please don't be dependent on the government. And again, we are now dependent on foreign countries. Many of them are adversaries for what we could produce here in America and help our economy.
French, you have thoughts?
Well, I just would follow Adrian's good comments about friend-shoring or near-shoring. So many of these critical minerals are in Russia, they're in China, they're in South Africa, countries that are not necessarily friends of the United States. And so diversifying that supply chain here and in those friendly countries requires R&D, requires private sector investment, requires good trade relations with those countries and building better relationships with them. And I think we have the capacity to do that, but also innovation. In Arkansas, in our brine fields left over from the 1920s oil boom in South Arkansas, they've discovered huge stores and stocks of pools of lithium that can be distilled from brine, which is much cheaper than going and digging it, out of the earth, in a mining operation. And so that's the kind of innovation that we need, because we can't have a renewables policy in this country without adequate battery storage. And then I would just simply say it goes beyond energy into healthcare, pharmaceuticals. And we've all collaborated here several times to pass legislation that would make sure that pharmaceutical compounds, which right now are dominated by China, can be moved other places between Canada, the United States, Europe, and countries more friendly to the democracies, that we shore up our supply chain, truly, and diversify it and not be dependent on some of these governments that are hostile. So energy, pharmaceuticals, but you can think about that. And I think it's the number one issue for American business in the years ahead, is all the things we've talked about, but it's also how do we have a more dependable, more diverse supply chain. And Republicans have policies that will enhance that. And despite the efforts by Joe Biden to curtail it. One final comment on energy. Freeport, Texas. 2% of natural gas production goes through Freeport, Texas. It's 20% of our LNG exports. 20%. Right as Europe is trying to build its stocks because of Putin's war. And it's shut down right now. They had a fire a few weeks ago. The private sector company said, we'll be up and running after Labor Day. Joe Biden's administration said, nope. The Pipeline Inspection Administration will tell you when you can open. You can't make this up. Either domestically, and of course we want it to be open, safe, and sound, and that's our first obligation of the company. But let me tell you, that's an example where Biden's administration should take action today that helps America, American jobs, and helps our allies in Europe.
So that is a very good place to stop, which is when we have an administration in Washington that says something's a priority, yet none of their actions go to that priority.
Yep.
Therefore, it's not a priority, right? And so what we're trying to do is answer the question the American people have raised, that our economy has raised, that we have a brittle U.S. supply chain that has been currently done in by bad regulation, bad tax policy, and bad trade policy. But most powerfully, this administration has used their regulatory powers when it comes to energy, even when it comes to the ability of a trucker to pick up goods at a port and drive it out. Even that has been curtailed by this administration's view of regulation. So what we're trying to do as House Republicans is offer this culmination of what we've talked about and solutions, first naming the problem and then seeking solutions to solve that problem. And the documents that we put forward and explaining our policies, our solutions to this are real. They're substantive, they're actionable, and they're achievable. But we have to understand it's not just one thing. When we talk about the U.S. supply chain, it's not about just roads and bridges or ports. It comes down to regulatory policy that you cannot see but you feel, tax policy that you can see in terms of the extraction from the economy, but the disincentive that comes from bad tax policy, the disincentive for domestic investment, and trade policy that is that tax on certain goods, saying it is not a priority for us to purchase from friends around the world. So we have a strong set of solutions. This has been a very healthy discussion. I want to thank those of you that have watched. I want to thank you for watching and understanding this conversation the House Republicans are attempting to have with the American people about a broad array of solutions about the challenges the American people face. And if given the opportunity to deliver on these policies, we're going to see good results. I want to thank my colleague and friend, Adrian Smith, my colleague and friend, French Hill, my colleague and friend, Lisa McLean. You're all colleagues and friends.
Great to be with you.
Great to be with you all. Thank you all.
Thank you.